Alright, so we're going to talk about intertextuality and allusion. Before we get into some details, I would like to read a portion of this text, this book, a book I published in 2013, I think. I've forgotten the year of publication. Yep, 2013. So let me go to the portion of the text I want to read with you. I have to use this feature known as find, and maybe I can write edit find. Let me write accuse. You know what the verb accuse means. Next. Okay, here we are. Maybe before I start reading the extract, I still want to read. Maybe I can start from the earlier two paragraphs. But can you see now? Should I enlarge the screen, or is it visible enough?
It's clear.
Oh, great. Okay, let's now. Okay, what should I? Let's now look at the second example where I examine the importance of a tracing or unraveling intertextual and interdiscursive relationships. Tracing or unraveling. So when we talk about intertextuality, we trace, we try to unravel the interconnections that might exist between texts, the interlinks or the echoes that exist between texts. Intertextual tracing or unraveling intertextual and interdiscursive discourse, interdiscursivity between utterances, texts, genres, and discourses. In deciphering a discursive event, in trying to understand a text. As noted at the beginning of this section, the purpose of the second example is not only to show how a text is normally the product of a number of other past and present discourses or texts, intertextuality, being and then recontextualized and then recontextualized to produce a new hybrid interdiscourse, but also the importance of realizing these intertextual interdiscursive relationships by analyzing, interpreting, consulting subject specialists and invoking their original historical context, by digging deep in the collective memory or code or jargon of a certain discourse type. Are you following, or is this too much? It's important then not just to recognize that texts are usually the product of other texts, but also the ability to be able to trace these intertextual sources by invoking their original historical context in which they were written, and see the relationship between the original text and the current text. On page 159, we've seen a heading or a subheading 13.1.4, allusion signals a relationship between texts. So you need to see that relationship. After, of course, you recognize that this is an allusion. So the first step, if you look at page, what page now? What page is this? I can't locate the page now, but the first step is to recognize that there is an allusion, an intertextual reference, a reference to another text, whether explicit or implicit. If it's explicit in the form of a quotation, you can easily recognize it because you can see a quotation. You can recognize that this is an allusion to a text, but sometimes the allusion might be indirect. So the first point is to be able to recognize, to realize that there is an allusion. Once you recognize that, you need to go to the original source and see the original text, and then see the relationship. Why did the author invoke that text, which might have been produced 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago? What relationship for you to appreciate the allusion? Okay, back to my own text explaining this. To illustrate interdiscourse. So now let's give an actual example. I'm going to start, my discussion about intertextuality, or as I call it here in this text, my own text, interdiscursivity. Interdiscursivity. Because I'm talking about discourse. Okay, you can think now of discourse as a text. To illustrate interdiscourse, intertext, we've just come in the video we watched before my presentation, we came across intertext. So text versus intertext. So it seems that maybe the proper way now to call texts is to call them intertexts, since each text is really the production of multiple texts. Whether this is done consciously or subconsciously. Language exists before us. If you look at the argument of Roland Barthes, who called for the death of the author, then you see the justification why texts are necessarily intertextual. No one created language. No one created these forms, the genres, the conventions. No particular person. So we are born and we have the language and we have these conventions and we have these forms that we draw upon, and we are born in a culture. So, okay, let's look at the example before we expand on this issue more. Let us now consider the following extract to see interdiscursive relations, intertextual relations, taken from the preface to Ilan Pappé's monograph, book if you like, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. So this extract I took from a book published by an Israeli historian who lives now in the UK and teaches at the University of Exeter. He published a book in 2006 titled The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, referring to the 1948 ethnic cleansing of Palestine. What Palestinians call the event, the Palestinians call the Nakba, literally catastrophe, but it means the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That began in took place in 1948, when the Palestinians were kicked out of their homeland, historical homeland, and half of the Palestinians now are living outside Palestine. They live in diaspora, in exile, in neighboring countries and other countries. So more than 7 million of Palestinians are living since 1948 in exile. They have the keys to their homes still with them. Of course, their homes have been demolished and the geography and the demography have been transformed. But this is not the issue now. In order not to lose our discussion, we're talking about intertextuality. So I was reading in that book, published in 2006, and I came across this paragraph I'm going to look at with you now. So the Ilan Pape, the Israeli historian, by the way, this historian has been kicked out of Israel, the 1948 ethnically cleansed Palestine, because he is being fair, and he described what the Israeli gangs at the time, because Israel was not born at the time. Israel was born after the ethnically cleansed Palestine, after they committed genocides and expelled the Palestinian population. So Israel was born then, at the death of historic Palestine. So this author, Israeli citizen, called a spade, described what took place in 1948 as ethnic cleansing. And so he's the first one credited for this, accurate description. Where are we? So Israel kicked him out of Israel because of being fair and just, and he, as I said, lives in the UK now. Where are we? He says in his book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, it is indeed my own Jacques. It is indeed my own Jacques against the politicians who devised and the generals who perpetrated the ethnic cleansing. Still, when I mention their names, I do so not because I want to see them posthumously brought to trial after death, but in order to humanize the victimizers, the Palestinians, the Israelis, Zionists, as well as the victims, the Palestinians. I want to prevent the crimes Israel committed from being attributed to such elusive factors as the circumstances, the army, or any other elusive discursive label or justification, and similar vague references that let sovereign states off the hook and enable individuals to escape justice. Zach City, it is indeed my own Jacques against the politicians. What is Jacques? You are, suppose you've bought this book, you found it in Kinokuniya, you bought it and you are reading now. The author says, it is indeed my own Jacques against the politicians who devised and the generals who perpetrated the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1948. It is indeed my own Jacques. What is that? It is indeed my own Jacques.
Is it opinion?
Sorry?
Is it opinion?
Speak louder, please.
Is it opinion?
What is opinion?
Just the reader's own view towards the politicians.
It is indeed my own Jacques. What is Jacques? What is being communicated here? You can look, you can go to the book and see. This is the extra. Okay, now, it is indeed my own Jacques. What does this mean? Jacques, used by Pape, mean. Notice that I am not after the literal meaning, which is simply I accuse. I am not asking about the literal meaning. The literal meaning in French is I accuse. Jacques. Je t'aime. I love you. Je, I, and accuse, the same verb, the English verb, accuse, keys. So it means I accuse. It is indeed my own I accuse. There's an obvious allusion here. So to understand that, you need to know what this allusion referred to. So I wondered at the time when I read the text, I did my search. When I read the text, just like you now, I didn't understand. But I realized that this must be an allusion. The author is alluding to something in the past. I need to uncover, I need to unravel, I need to trace this to its original source for me to appreciate and understand what's going on in front of me. So I was in the face of an allusion. So let me see now where my investigation led me. Because I did an investigation, I try to understand. Having recognized that there is an allusion, then I have to know the source. Read the source and then see the link or the relationship for me to appreciate and understand the current text or intertext. How are we to understand what Pepe means by "it is indeed my own Jacques" against the politicians who devised and the generals who perpetrated the ethnic cleansing? Why my own? Looking at the literal or lexical meaning of the phrase does not help, nor does the present context alone seem to help, nor does the grammatical construction help. Despite its simplicity, I accuse, subject verb, simple. Meaning lies then beyond the syntactical, grammatical, lexical, lexicographical, and contextual constituents of the discursive event in question. Meaning goes beyond all this. Meaning goes beyond the grammatical structure. It is simple. I accuse. It is indeed my own I accuse. Jacques. So the question persists. Where does meaning lie? And where are we to find it? So unless we recognize then that this is an allusion, and to begin tracing this allusion to its origin, we cannot understand and appreciate the text. And so the first step is to recognize that it is an allusion. Having recognized that, okay, first step. Now you need to trace this to its origin. And so you have to go beyond the discursive, beyond the textual to the metatextual. Beyond the textual to the metatextual. You need to go beyond the text. Grammar does not help here. It's not a question of grammar or a question of semantics or a question of and so let me skip. We have to go beyond, okay, we have to dig deep into the interconnected heteroglossia of voices, interdiscursivity, intertextuality, where historical and social facts are incorporated. The notion that every discourse is bound up with many others, every text is bound up with many others, and can only be understood on the basis of others. Every text, I use the word discourse, every text is bound up with others. part of, they only draw upon upon the culture, and texts are part of the culture, part of what Michael Halliday calls the social semiotic. On the unraveling of such intertextual, interdiscursive interconnectedness, the intertextual interpretation or interpretive analysis of the text is equivalent to the second dimension or stage of analysis. Okay, let me skip this. Let me move on. Therefore, we have to stretch our imagination beyond the immediate context and browse through the layers of the collective political memory, the collective textual memory, to find intertextual links. The meaning might be shrouded in a tenuous, elusive, and veiled admixture of interdiscursivity, in the centripetal, centrifugal intertextuality of texts, in a discursive hybrid collage that makes a text or discursive event an imbrication of immediate linguistic ingenuity or creativity and past disguised allusion or intertextual reference. Okay, I'll now go to the original source. I looked for it and I found it. So now we have recognized that this is an allusion, a reference to another past text. So now we're going to look for the original source. Okay, so now the last paragraph here. Now back to Pape's own version of, before that, having said that, or this, let us now get back to the event in question, the text in question. It is indeed my own Jarquez. According to Britannica Concise Encyclopedia, Alfred Dreyfus, a French army officer of Jewish extraction, was accused of selling military secrets to Germany. Okay. Guys, are you following?
Yes, doctor.
The allusion has to do with an event that took place in France more than 100 years ago. It was about a military officer, an officer in the French army of Jewish extraction, of Jewish origin, a Jew, whose name is Alfred Dreyfus, and his issue became known as the Dreyfus Affair. It was a national crisis. It was a big problem. Now, this military, French military officer of Jewish origin was accused of selling military secrets. Was accused of selling military secrets to Germany. So he was convicted and he was court-martialed and as a result sentenced to life imprisonment. Okay? Put in prison for life. But this guy, Dreyfus, however, it was found that the evidence was irregular and insufficient, which caused a lot of unrest nationwide. The evidence against him was not strong, was found to be insufficient, irregular, and the guy seemed to be innocent of the charge he was convicted of. So this led to a crisis, a national crisis, caused a lot of unrest nationwide. The Dreyfus affair, as it was known, consequently turned into a national crisis. At this juncture, Emile Zola, should I use the chat كلها? Emile Zola, a French writer who died in 1902 at the beginning of the 20th century. Emile Zola, a French writer, a novelist, rose up and wrote a famous letter titled Jacques, accusing the military of covering up its errors in making the case, thus bringing the affair again into public attention, and eventually, based on the authority of the word, acquitting Dreyfus of the false charge. Now we understand Jacques. Now that we have understood the historical context of the first Jacques, upon which Ilan Pape was drawing, now we appreciate the text and understand the allusion. So Jacques, upon which Ilan Pape draws, it is indeed my own Jacques against the generals who perpetrated the ethnic cleansing. My own I accuse. So Jacques was the title of a letter written by Emile Zola as a cry, as an outcry. I accuse. I accuse the military. I accuse the military for covering up, for accusing an innocent person. I accuse Jacques. And look at it sounds like a bomb. So this is then the original Jacques. And when we look at the relationship between the original Jacques, I accuse, and the current or Ilan Pape's own version of Jacques, I accuse, then we understand. So we go back to the extract we read at the beginning. It is indeed my own Jacques or version of Jacques against the politicians, Israeli politicians, who devised, who planned the ethnic cleansing and perpetrated the ethnic cleansing in Palestine. So, in other words, the author here by, excuse me, Ya Fatima, take this up the stairs quickly or outside. So here, the author, because the first Jacques, the original Jacques, was the reason behind the acquittal of the accused Dreyfus. And so that Jacques helped bring justice to a wrong. So Ilan Pape here, as he justifies, it is indeed my own Jacques against the politicians who devised and the generals who perpetrated the ethnic genocide. Still, when I mention their names, I do so not because I want to see them after death posthumously, because brought to trial, because those generals who, like for example, Sharon and Yitzhak Sharon or Yitzhak Rabin, they have already died. This event took place in 1948. The crime of ethnic cleansing took place in 1948. And so most of the generals who planned and perpetrated this expulsion of the Palestinians from their homeland have died. So there's no point now in they're dead. We cannot now bring them to trial, to the ICJ. So his point is that by doing that, I do not mean to bring them to trial when they are dead, but rather in order to humanize the victimizers, make them victims, the Israelis make them humans, as well as the victims, the Palestinians. And so, in other words, he wants to bring justice. I want to prevent the crimes Israel committed from being attributed to such elusive factors as the circumstances, the army. So he wants to bring justice now to the Palestinians. It is indeed my own jockeys. Okay, this is a very good example of allusion and the beauty of allusion. Having said that, let's now define intertextuality and allusion more. Intertextuality, I'll begin with intertextuality and then allusion. Since allusion is is a kind of intertextuality. So I begin by defining intertextuality. Intertextuality is when a text then makes a reference to another text. Would you like to write? I will copy all of this and send it to you in a message at the end of the class, because these are my own notes in my own mobile. So I will just make a copy and WhatsApp them to you. But let's go through these notes quickly now. Siti, are you there? Intertextuality is when a text makes a reference to another text, either directly or indirectly. Directly through a quotation or indirectly. A text is a new tissue of past citations. A text is a new tissue of past citations. It is indeed my own jockeys. It's a new text, a new tissue with past citations. Every writer or artist or producer, every writer or artist or producer, movie producer, an artist of a painting, every artist or writer or producer is inevitably inspired by everything that they have seen before. A movie producer, a writer, we have read many things, we have seen many things in our life, and so whatever we produce is inevitably inspired by what we have seen throughout our life, from schooling to university to every day. So there are going to be traces then about the texts within their own, even if they aren't explicit. Texts are bound by other texts or with other texts in the culture. It refers, intertextuality, to the intertextual traces of other voices and discourses. Jockeys. So this text was produced in 2006. But it makes a verbal echo, an allusion to an incident that took place towards the end of the 19th century, about 1890. It refers to the intertextual traces or other voices and discourses, the interconnected heteroglossia of voices. Heteroglossia, different, glossia, sounds, voices, different voices, heteroglossia of voices, or the fact that texts are a hybrid collage. Intertextuality is then a kind of verbal collage. And movies, the same thing. And paintings, the same thing. And so, no text is an island. City, no text is an island. What is an island? An island exists on its own. Alone. An island surrounded by water. And so no text is an island. It interacts with other texts. It is the result of other texts. Its production was inspired inevitably by many other texts. Movies, paintings, poems. According to post-structuralist theorists, such as Julia Kristeva, I think she is the one who devised the term intertextuality. And Roland Barthes, these are post-structuralist theorists. According to them, all language usage is inevitably intertextual. All language usage is inevitably intertextual. In my own speech now, in my own presentation now, I have made references to many other texts, incorporating many other voices in the same text I am making now, the spoken text. Whether consciously or unconsciously. But now I'm, in many cases, conscious, because I'm explaining this issue. So we draw upon other texts. A text, as we have said, is a new tissue of past citations. No text is an island. Or as the English critic T.S. Eliot says, no poet or artist of any kind has his complete meaning alone. No writer of a poem, of a novel, no film producer of a movie has his complete meaning alone. His production, his final product, has been influenced by many other products before. So it is not very original in the narrow sense. It is not highly original when we take originality in a narrow sense. No. According to the Moroccan poet Benis, he says من الدم تأتي الكتابة ومن الموتى أيضا. In Arabic, Moroccan. So he says من الدم, from blood, تأتي الكتابة, comes writing, and from the dead. Writing comes from blood and from the dead. Does this make sense to you, Jaydan? Writing comes from blood and from the dead. Writing comes from blood and from the dead. Does this make sense to you? I will explain. Writing comes from blood. That's your own creativity as the writer. From your own, your blood, from your imagination, from your mind, from your creativity, from your talent, individual talent, as T.S. Eliot calls it in his influential essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent. So, writing comes from blood. That's your talent. And from the dead, meaning the tradition, earlier works, the hundreds of poets before you that you have been influenced by, the hundreds of painters before you from whom you have been influenced and inspired, the hundreds and thousands of film producers before you. Writing comes from blood and from the dead, meaning from the individual talent, and from the tradition. Are you following? So if I quote this statement in the final exam and ask you to explain it, do you know what I mean then by writing comes from blood and the dead?
Yes, doctor.
Reading is necessarily then an intertextual process. For post-structuralist theorists, as we have said, such as Julia Kristeva and Roland Barthes, all language usage is inevitably intertextual. For Barthes, a text is a multidimensional space in which a variety of writings, none of them original in this sense, blend and clash. The text is a tissue then, a tissue of quotations, of citations, past citations, drawn from the innumerable centers of culture, the centripetal, centrifugal centers of culture. So no text is an island. No artist, no poet, no producer has his complete meaning alone. Writing comes from blood and from the dead. A prominent example of intertextuality is T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Class, focus with me. يا جماعة سكتوا البنت، الصوت كله بيطلع في التسجيل. A prominent example of intertextuality can be found in a modernist piece of literature taken from T.S. Eliot's works, The Wasteland. This is a poem produced by T.S. Eliot, created by T.S. Eliot in the 20th century, the first part of the 20th century. In this poem, the writer, the author, makes about 37 allusions. فاطمة سكت البنت يا عم، الصوت بيطلع في التسجيل. He makes a reference to about 37 works. We can see that in the notes he makes at the end of the poem, in the footnotes. And so the poem is a collage of quotations, a collage of allusions, a collage of quotations and allusions. It is highly allusive, highly intertextual. If T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, published in 1922, this poem, is read alongside the footnotes, Eliot printed with it, we get a sense of the poem as a collage of quotations and allusions from and allusions to other texts. In the postmodernist period, now T.S. Eliot belongs to the modernist period, roughly 1910 to 1940. This was known as modernism. Now, postmodernism came after modernism, roughly from 1960 until the present. In the postmodernist period, writers such as Angela Carter and Umberto Eco seem to have set aside attempts to be original in the narrow sense, to participate in an intertextual free-for-all. Everyone can get in the text, in which the possibility that all writing is allusive and or intertextual is celebrated for its own sake. This is taken from a subheading titled Intertextuality and Originality. So originality in the narrow sense cannot be understood here. It is written by T.S. Eliot, the Magic Toy Shop by Angela Carter, The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, but they make extensive use of allusions, referring to other texts, whether directly through quotations or indirectly, in a way that celebrates, the intertextual text for its own sake. يا فاطمة صوتكم بيطلع في التسجيل عندي في ضبط. Okay, where are we? Let's now focus on allusion. Allusion is a form of intertextuality, and that's why I have started with intertextuality. Intertextuality, as we have defined it, when a text makes a reference to another text, either directly or indirectly. Allusion is a form of intertextuality, interdiscursivity, which works largely through verbal echoes between texts, both known and unknown. Remember Jacques? Allusion signals, as we have said, a relationship between texts. It is indeed my own Jacques. There is a relationship. When we digged into the past and uncovered or traced the allusion to its original source, we could see the relationship, bringing justice to an unjust situation. Émile Zola, by that letter he wrote, Jacques, as though shouting, Jacques, I accuse. I accuse whom? The military, the intelligence, the nation, the government. I accuse. So he brought justice to the case, and the guy was, the convicted guy, Dreyfus, was acquitted. So by the relationship then between that reference and the current reference by Hélène Papé is that he wants to bring justice to an unjust case that has been to an injustice that has been going on for decades, until now, for 72 years, 1948 until now, 72 years. And when he published the book in 2006, you can count from 1948 to 2006, about 60 years. So he wanted to bring justice to, just like Émile Zola's Jacques brought justice to the Dreyfus affair, he, by his own Jacques, by announcing his own Jacques, he wants to bring justice to the Palestinians. So So that's the relationship. And so this involves trying to work out the similarities and differences, between the two texts that are momentarily brought together by an allusion. The similarities, differences, to see and appreciate. And so now the purpose of allusion. There are two purposes. Allusion serves to place a text within the textual network that makes up a cultural tradition. And so allusion adds cultural value. Allusion adds cultural value to a text. Allusions are thought to invoke some of the cultural connotations of the source text, and by a process of it transfer or bestow them on the product being promoted. It is indeed my own jar keys. The second purpose allusions serve. Allusions can also serve to flatter readers. To flatter readers who can recognize the allusion. Giving those who recognize the illusion of being superior to those who don't even realize that an allusion is being made. On page 157, the second line, and Cadbury's Bournville chocolate advertised with the caption, "If a chocolate be the food of gods, heaven must be in Birmingham." While I was preparing for your class, when I read this, I smiled. I knew that there was an allusion here. I recognized the allusion. I could not recognize the allusion in the first advertisement, the one about the Renault car advertised with the caption, "A room of my own." I did not know that there was an allusion here. And I did not know the allusion. But in the second example, I know this. If chocolate be the food of gods, heaven must be in Birmingham. There is an allusion to Shakespeare's play Twelfth Night. The words of Shakespeare, "If a music be the food of love, play on, give me access of it." Shakespeare said in the Twelfth Night, "If a music be the food of love, give me access of it." So when I read, "If a chocolate be the food of gods," my mind instantly went back to Shakespeare 400 years ago. I could see the allusion. And so, recognizing the allusion can flatter the reader. You feel, wow, you feel superior, sophisticated, compared to someone who does not even recognize that there is an allusion. If a music be the food of love, play on, give me access of it. But the music is not the food of love. If it were, now I'm explaining what Shakespeare meant, another story. If a music be the food of love, play on. But this is if it was the food of love, which implies that it is not the food of love. It is not the food of love. If it was, play on, give me access of it. But my belief is that it is not the food of love. And so, looking at this advertisement, "If a chocolate be the food of gods, heaven must be in Birmingham." But the chocolate is not the food of gods, and so heaven is not in Birmingham. Heaven is in my classroom. Do you agree, Kong? Heaven is in my classroom. Are you lost? Okay, it's recorded, this class, so you can listen to the recording again to see what they mean. Okay, let's move on. Do we still have time to go on anyhow? It's already 11:08. Okay, so this is all about this chapter, Intertextuality and Allusion. The next chapter, we've already also touched briefly about some of the issues raised in this chapter, and we did at the beginning of the semester. Unfortunately, now I have no time to move into authorship and intention and discuss it in some detail. So please do the reading on your own, and in case you have any questions, you can ask me. Next week, next session tomorrow, we're gonna move into 2 more topics: Unit 15, positioning the reader or spectator, and Unit 16 will be about rhyme and sound patterning. We're going to look at alliteration. Rhyme and sound patterning, or poetic forms, section 4, is some of the chapters are highly technical. We're going to look at especially Unit 17, but this will be next week, not this week. Verse, meter, and rhythm. We're going to look at some technical issues. You've heard, for example, we've come across iambic pentameter. I am sure that most of you do not know what is iambic and what is pentameter is. And I couldn't, explain this at the time when we came across, when you classmates, mentioned iambic pentameter or tetrameter, or I knew that there would be, a class for this discussion. So this would be next week. We're going to look at the metrical feet in English, and take a quick look at them, especially the iambic foot. But we're going also to look at the other feet, such as the trochaic foot, the spondaic foot, the anapistic foot, the dactylic foot, etc., etc. I know Kong now is completely lost. This is Japanese to her, but no worries, Kong. Everything will be made easy as long as you are in my classroom. If chocolate be the food of gods, then Birmingham will be heaven. But chocolate is not the food of gods, and the music is not the food of love, and so the food of love is what you take in my classes, and heaven is my class. Any questions in class before we end the class? Any questions in class before we end the class? This is alliteration. Alliteration, sound patterning. All right. No questions? See you next week. Have fun.
Thank you, Doctor.
See you tomorrow, Doctor.
Thank you,
Oh,
Doctor.
ops tomorrow. I mean tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Doctor.
Not so
Thank you much,
fast.
Doctor.
Not so fast.
Goodbye.
See you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.